Something I noticed when we were considering movies for this season is that in 2008, something out of the ordinary happened. In 2007, of the top 20 box office hits of the year, the only movie that could be argued as coded toward women would be Enchanted, which I would argue is actually more of a kids' movie. But in 2008, included in the top 20 box office hits are Twilight, Sex and the City, and Mamma Mia. Unlike the rom-coms of the previous years, these are all big-budget films based on previously established intellectual properties like James Bond or Marvel, and were marketed widely. This 2008 bet paid off. Mamma Mia beat James Bond in the box office. Young women came out in droves to see Twilight, more than once. Looking at the data, you would think that this would be a huge tide change in how major studios approached making movies for women. And yet, when we look at 2009, things kind of look exactly the same as they did in 2007. There were still rom-coms. We got The Proposal and The Ugly Truth, but they're relegated back to their tropey, low-budget, easily dismissible corner. Hollywood has always made movies for women, but they seem to treat male and female audiences the same for 1 year, 2008. And that's the theme for our mini-season. And our question for this mini-season is, what was happening in 2008? We know that a lot of it is kind of random timing. Movies get greenlit, shot, approved, and edited on all sorts of timelines. But still, something fascinating was happening. Today, we start on our quest on this question by looking closely at the film Twilight. Twilight may not need an introduction, but I'll give you a few reminders. It was a star maker for both Kristen Stewart and Robert Pattinson. It was based on the behemoth bestseller of the same name by Mormon author Stephenie Meyer. The Twilight Saga series was a phenomenon. The first movie came out around the same time as the last novel in the series, Breaking Dawn. Although now is when I have to tell you that Meyer took up her pen for these characters again starting in 2015, but I think most of us don't consider those to be real canon. Twilight is a vampire romance novel written before the term romantasy was coined, and in the early 2000s was only outsold by Harry Potter. The film, released in 2008, was directed by Catherine Hardwicke from a screenplay by Melissa Rosenberg. Rosenberg would continue to adapt all of the screenplays for the films. However, Hardwicke would only do the one. Although Twilight reached a $400 million worldwide gross with a budget of only $37 million, the remaining 4 films in the series would be directed by men. There was a lot of negative press coverage about these movies. People were very concerned that these films were bad for women. But boy, did audiences love it. Teenage girls and 40-year-old women went again and again. The story is about Bella Swan, Phoenix, Arizona native who has to move to Forks, Washington, one of the rainiest, gloomiest parts of the United States, to live with her dad for her last 2 years of high school.
Hey, you're from Arizona, right?
Yeah.
Aren't people from Arizona supposed to be, really tan?
While there, she meets and falls in love with the gorgeous Edward Cullen. She also gets reintroduced to someone who she knew as a kid, Jacob, a member of the Quileute tribe, who's important in Twilight lore, but doesn't play a huge role in this first film. The mutual attraction is strong between Edward and Bella. He seems as obsessed with her as she is with him. but he keeps avoiding her.
You know, your mood swings are kind of giving me whiplash.
I only said it'd be better if we weren't friends, not that I didn't want to be.
What does that mean?
It means if you were smart, you'd stay away from me.
What is getting in their way? Well, Edward is a vampire who wants to suck her blood. He can't stay away, and yet he must.
I'm not afraid of you. I'm only afraid of losing you. I feel like you're going to disappear.
Once they're situated in love, Bella meets the rest of Edward's quote-unquote family, a coven committed to being vegetarian vampires, meaning that they only kill and eat animals, not humans. But Edward and Bella are not allowed to be happy for long. There are a series of murders happening around Forks. The police, including Bella's dad, is convinced that these deaths are being done by animals. But actually, this siege of murders is being committed by 3 nomadic vampires, including James, a tracker vampire. So silly, I love it. James gets excited by Bella's scent and becomes obsessed with hunting her.
He's never gonna stop.
What should we do?
We have to kill him. Rip him apart and burn the pieces.
The Cullens try to protect Bella, but James is able to track her back to Phoenix, Arizona, where he attacks Bella and almost makes her a vampire. But the Cullens arrive just in time. They kill James, and Edward has to do the impossible: suck on Bella to remove the venom from her, but not so much that he drains her of all of her blood and kills her. In the aftermath, Edward accompanies an injured Bella to the prom because, of course, where he refuses her request to transform her into a vampire. For now, ... We did a previous season of Hot and Bothered all about Twilight. On that podcast, I was not shy about my deeply ambivalent, skewing toward negative feelings about these novels. But I want to be clear. I love this movie. And I think it is the perfect way to start thinking about what the heck was going on in 2008 with women's films. I'm Vanessa Zoltan.
I'm Hannah McGregor.
And this is Hot and Bothered.
Oh man, Vanessa, I recently had to read the first Twilight book for an episode of Material Girls, and I gotta tell you, I like these movies way more than these books.
The movies are so much better. And Hannah, I really believe with my whole heart that Twilight 1 is like iconic camp, but Twilight 5
also iconic camp
is a perfect film.
Yeah, but we're not talking about Twilight 5, we're talking about Twilight 1, and it is its own special sort of unself-conscious kind of camp that truly creates some pleasurable viewing moments. I mean, that first time that Edward shows us how sparkly his skin is, no moment in cinema will ever compare. He's so sparkly.
I don't think he's sparkly enough.
An excellent critique. 8 out of 10 sparkles. Could be sparklier.
Could be so much sparklier. I'd be like, oh, you're sparkling, I guess.
I guess?
Yeah, no, it's not enough sparkle. Not enough sparkle.
I'm sorry. He is coated in a thick layer of body glitter. It's outrageous.
So, Hannah, what does this movie think about love?
Okay. I mean, so much. This movie thinks so many things about love. And I think we gotta start with the real obsessive elephant in the room, which is that this is a movie in which love and obsession are treated as deeply interconnected.
Yes.
That Edward can't get enough of Bella. He describes her as being like his own personal brand of heroine. He stalks her. He sneaks into her bedroom at night to watch her sleep. He is not great at boundaries.
No.
And that kind of obsessive, semi-dangerous love, right? The like, I can't stay away from you, but I can't be with you because I'm bad for you and I'll hurt you and I'm dangerous is, I mean, for me, a little alarming to think about as a characteristic of real life romance.
Right.
And a trope I quite enjoy
right.
in romance as a genre. And I think maybe it's worth talking a little bit about romance tropes and the way that like this book series and this movie series caused a lot of moral panic around like this being a story about love that was being promoted to teenage girls. And like, is this going to create a culture in which teenage girls are more likely to accept an abusive relationship as being loving rather than harmful?
Yeah. I was a high school teacher when this book was at its height, which is why I read the book for the first time. So I was teaching high school from 2004 to 2008-ish, 2007. And I was scared of that. I read the book and I was like, this is unacceptable. And I like did an emergency stop in class. I was like, I did the thing that you guys asked me to do. You asked me to read this book. Danielle Sassy asked me to read the book. And I did it. And I would like to take a minute. Don't go anywhere with a boy that you can't get home on your own. He shouldn't have to carry you. I don't like it.
If a boy spends a bunch of time talking about how easily he could murder you, that's like the reddest flag.
It's such a red flag. It's a blood red flag, if you will.
It's a diamond encrusted flag.
Not diamond encrusted enough. And it's not that I thought my students were stupid, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a hyper-articulated within the romance reading community, like, I love this in a man in a book, and I would never date a man who did this, right? Like,
yes,
super hot when a man shows up at my door at midnight with flowers and a book. If he did that in real life, I'd be like, it's past my bedtime, please go away. There are things we like in books that we don't like in real life, but it's scary when you're watching a kid love it because you're like, I don't know what you love about this. And I'm worried sorry to use this Twilight word, I'm worried it's imprinting on you in potentially bad ways, right? Like, it is scary. Yeah. I clutched my pearls. I taught in pearls.
Always pearls in a sweater set.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting for me personally as a romance reader and a romance viewer that there are tropes that I enjoy thoroughly in romance as a genre. And all of them are deeply and profoundly unrelated to the way I live my life.
Right.
Like, I am queer and asexual. I am not interested in any men. And I enjoy the gothic hero, the way that this trope of like, I want to be with you, but I can't be with you, creates narrative tension. And I particularly enjoy what it tends to do for our heroine,
right?
Which is like the gothic heroine, going back to Jane Eyre, for example, is somebody who, faced with a series of mysterious, uncontrollable, incomprehensible events, figures out her way through, generally through like sheer determination.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a big part of the pleasure for me. And a big part of the pleasure of Edward and Bella's relationship for me is not Edward's obsession. It's Bella's single-minded determination.
Mm-hmm.
Bella knows what she wants.
Mm-hmm.
Edward is comparatively pretty wishy-washy. He's kind of on again, off again. He's like, I'm obsessed with you, but I can't be with you. And Bella's like, too bad, bud. This is what we're doing.
Yeah.
Imagine if Bella called him bud.
You know, honestly, just about anything could make its way into this movie and I'd be like, cohesive. Because it's such a wild ride.
Yeah.
One of the things that I love that I do believe that this movie believes is that girls are horny.
Yes, really important.
And I love that this movie believes that.
Yeah, and that it's not just Bella. It's not just like, oh, Bella has been overwhelmed by this charismatic vampire. All the girls are horny.
All the girls are horny.
And one of the things Bella does is empower the other teenage girls in her life to go after what they want.
Yep, go ask
that
them
it's
out.
not just for her. She's like, oh, you want to go out with that guy? Go ask him to go to prom with you. It's great.
Yeah, no, absolutely. A couple of things that I really love that this movie believes about love is I adore how many questions Bella and Edward ask each other. Some of the questions are really silly. It's like a lot of what's your favorite?
A lot of just getting to know you.
Yeah, but they deeply want to know each other, which I find very sweet. Like, what's nicer than someone wanting to know you?
Something I really like about that is how many montages we get of the two of them talking to each other.
Yes.
That when we get falling in love montages of them, which we get a few of, they are talking.
Yeah.
And that is pretty tender.
Yeah. It's very sweet. And they like want to see each other's bedrooms. And like not to go do sexy things, right? It's like
a little bit to do sexy things, but also to see what music they're listening to.
Exactly, right? It's like what is in your CD deck right now. It's very sweet.
Yeah. What else do you think this movie believes about love?
Among other things, this is also a cross-class love story, right? It's a high school love story. We're talking about it as 2008. But what's interesting to me about the 2008 of it all is how much this movie still believes that love can make the world bigger for you. Like, this is 2008. This is like Obama is president time. And still, this guy with his access to money and a different culture is going to be able to show her things that she would not otherwise get to see with her cop dad and AAA baseball playing stepdad, right?
He can show her the world, shining, shimmering, splendid, like his skin.
Exactly.
Part of the fantasy of teen love that we see here is the way that it opens up and expands your world and makes it bigger. So it matters that he's older, that he has access to cars and travel and knowledge and forms of culture that she's not familiar with, right? That he is part of her coming of age, figuring out who she is, learning about the ways in which the world can be bigger and more complicated and more exciting and also more dangerous than it has been for her when she's younger. And that, you know, is one of the pleasures of a teen love story, is that we get to watch not just her fall in love, but also her sort of learn about herself and learn more about the world and her place in it.
And the vampire of it all matters, right? Because he can literally show her different altitudes because he can jump trees. So he can show her literal different perspectives. And then there's something about being with a much older person, a 100-year-old person, who can like give you a different perspective on time. So his vampireness is part of what is expanding her worldview.
For sure. And also at the same time, amidst all of this obsessive young love and these, you know, gothic, larger than life romantic themes, I also really appreciate that the movie is still interested in other forms of love as well. That, like, yes, romantic love is the major through line, but familial love still really matters.
Yeah.
That all of the Cullens show up for Bella because Edward has chosen her, and that means she's part of the family now. It doesn't matter if they personally like her or not. That's what family does. And, you know, one of the major tensions at the end of the movie is Bella having to lie to her dad in order to keep him safe. And when she wakes up in the hospital, her first question is, where's Edward? And her second question is, I need to talk to my dad and apologize to him because I have hurt his feelings. And I appreciate that as well, that even amidst this, like, larger than life romantic love, we've got a sense that family and community still matters deeply.
Yeah. Oh my God, this movie is so good. Okay.
Perfect movie. 100 out of 10, no notes.
So that is some of what is going on textually. What is going on subtextually?
I want to talk particularly about chivalry and the chivalric notion of love and romance, because we see a lot in this movie of, I could kill you, but I won't because I love you, but I could kill you super easily, but I won't, but I could.
Which, by the way, is just true of everyone all the time.
A really great point.
Right? Like,
yeah, if I go to sleep in the same room as you,
I am
rendering myself vulnerable to you. You don't have to be fast and sparkly to do it.
No, it's a creepy thing to constantly be pointing out.
It's a really creepy thing to be constantly pointing out. And in many ways, the most romantic gesture that Edward demonstrates is his consistent not killing of Bella.
Which is hot.
And that makes me think about the history of chivalry, right? That like chivalry as a set of codes for how gentlemen should behave towards women historically has a lot to do with protecting women from the inherent violence of men in a patriarchal culture, and also from keeping men from all just killing each other as well. And Edward has this very sort of chivalrous, right? It's like this sort of old-timey manner to him. He insists on opening doors for her. He cares for her in a way that is, I think, part of the romance of him. But the subtext of that kind of chivalric behavior is always violence.
Yeah.
Is always the latent possibility of violence and the recognition that somebody who could harm you is choosing to protect you instead. I think, there's a couple of scenes where that really comes through. In our Patreon bonus scene, I want us to talk about the part where he swoops around and shows her how fast he is. But also the scene where she's been cornered by a bunch of guys and he comes and gets her in his car and then is like, she has to talk him down so that he won't go back and kill those guys.
Yeah.
And the way that like he saved her, but his inherent violence has been put to use in defense of her, and it is her responsibility now to get that violence under control and make sure that it is tamed. Like, those subtexts are ones that feel closer to actually lived gender dynamics, which is to say, I've gotten in fights with men who won't let me hold the door for them.
Ugh. Do you slam it in their face? What do you do?
It's not a fight I'm willing to fight anymore. Hannah in her 20s had this fight a lot. Once a man crossed the street to where I was standing on the side of a busy street, he crossed the street to me to help me cross the street. And I was like, nah, dog, I'm a whole adult. But like, chivalry is underpinned by violence. And I always think of it when I see these kinds of manners on display.
I mean, there's a moment at which this becomes text, but is played for humor. When Edward and Charlie are going to meet for the first time, sort of formally.
And Charlie's cleaning his gun.
Charlie is cleaning his gun. And he says, like, okay, I'm ready to meet him. And then, like, I don't know, like, locks his gun. That's
I think the technical term is cha-chunks.
He doesn't cha-chunk it, though. He doesn't, like, rev it up to go. He doesn't load it.
Vanessa and I know so much about guns.
He just, like, closes it. He would still have to pump it to shoot it, I think.
Pump it? Okay, let's...
I think that's right. Anyway, but he like gets his gun readier, right?
There's a promise of violence.
There's a promise of violence. But but I think the violence of chivalry is often subtext. I think that's right.
Yeah. Yeah. What about you? What do you think are the subtexts in this movie?
It's very related, but she is a damsel in distress, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's played well because Kristen Stewart is a great actress.
Yeah, she rules.
She literally doesn't know how to walk on the ground in Washington because she's from Arizona, where they they don't have ice, right? Or moss, or
they don't have ground. They don't have the ground there.
And so the level at which she is a damsel in distress is pretty remarkable, right? Like, Stephenie Meyer has taken gravity away from this child. And Bella is smart, right? Like, there's a great scene where they're looking at cells together and, you know, Bella can tell you all the different phases of things. Like, she's very smart and capable, but, like, men are constantly helping her. They're explaining to her how to drive her car. They are putting chains on her tires for her.
They're punching the dents out of her truck.
Exactly. And so there is this just, like, real helplessness to a character who I think textually, what we've talked about, right, is a feminist character. Go ask out that person. Like, women are just as smart as men. I can ask for what I want. I can be horny. But subtextually, she really cannot walk through the world literally without men catching her.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And so much of their story is about, like, he's put her in danger.
Yeah.
And, you know, spoiler alert, in the next movie, he takes off and tries to do the, like, I can't be with you because I'm putting you in too much danger thing. But their first real close encounter is him saving her life.
Yeah.
Like, she hypothetically would have, I mean, been horribly injured or maybe killed in that car accident.
And their second intense interaction that leads to their first date, right? Like, she's about to be attacked by a group of men.
Yeah. Like, he does eventually put her in danger, but only after she has not put herself in danger, because there isn't a sense that Bella's behavior is erratic or untrustworthy or that she's irresponsible. It's like the world is so dangerous that it is remarkable that Bella has not already somehow died.
Yeah.
Yeah, she needs to be saved, and she is saved a bunch.
You know, we did a whole season of Hot and Bothered about Twilight. And some of the stuff that I remembered about this movie in the books were, like, fictional things.
Constructs from your own brain?
Exactly. Where it, like, headcanon. I was like, why isn't there a scene of Edward doing Bella's laundry? Like, that's one of the great things about the fact that he doesn't sleep, is that he can do her laundry. And I was like, oh, I made that up. That is something that Edward does in my head, but not in reality.
That's really funny.
He cleans the house while she's asleep. He doesn't sleep. Why isn't he making her life easier?
Great question. He's just watching her. How's that helpful? Do my homework.
But something that I was delighted to see was real was Edward's obsession with Volvos, which are notoriously the safest car. And I love that Edward is safety conscious. I love how safety conscious Edward is. And his obsession with Volvos. I do think that there's, throughout the books and the movies, there is something very, like, symbolic about the machines that people are driving in, right? Like, Jacob is working on a motorcycle and Edward has his Volvo.
I mean, I think it really matters that upon arriving in town, Bella gets a truck.
Yeah.
And, like, she's so excited that it's this, like,
so sweet,
beat up old rust bucket of a truck. And she's so stoked. And a big part of that is about her autonomy.
Yeah. It's freedom.
Yeah, exactly. That she can just declare, I'm going into this town.
Yep.
Like, I can just go into Port Angeles and buy a book. That's just a thing that I can do. I can just get in my truck and drive anywhere I want. And I think it matters that we see the men in her life facilitating this mobility, facilitating this autonomy. And I think it also matters that it is around the scenes of cars that she is also frequently the most at risk.
Yeah.
Right? So there's this sense that, like, it is important that she has this freedom, and it is her freedom that makes her vulnerable.
Yeah.
And that's, like, kind of true about life, isn't it?
And that is why this film is genius.
200 out of 10.
Just keeps getting better. Yeah.
Okay. Vanessa, our theme for this mini season is 2008.
Yeah.
And other than saying that something is so 2000 and late, I want to know how the 2008-ness of this movie resonates for you.
I think Kristen Stewart is what is so 2008. about this movie. She plays this role in the least damsel in distress way possible. She'll say about herself that she's a klutz and that she's a bad dancer. And then you like see her slip on ice, but not in a slapsticky way, not in a pathetic way. There is something about this movie where Bella is a whole person. You see these young women, even when they are competing with each other, still trying to be nice to each other. Alice is super excited to meet Bella, right? Like, there's just like a lot of women being really kind to each other in this movie.
Yeah.
And so the feminism feels much more comfortable to me than the stuff from 5 years prior. It is starting to feel, even though this is, you know, over 15 years ago, contemporary in terms of how it's treating young women, which is funny because it is not something that I think about when I think about Twilight and Stephenie Meyer's Mormonism and conservatism, right? But like, there is something really refreshing about the way Bella is portrayed.
Yeah, and I think it's more present in the film than in the novels. I think
For sure.
Kristen Stewart's performance is a lot of what makes Bella feel like a appealing and contemporary heroine. I do think it's interesting in the context of the end of the 2000s, which is an era that, what is that Constance Grady's referred to, the bubblegum misogyny of the 2000s, right?
Yeah.
That it's like this era where pop culture is treating women like garbage, right? Like the way that we saw Britney Spears get treated and the way that we're grappling now collectively as a culture with the way people like Britney Spears were treated by the mainstream media, the way that young women could be talked about, hypersexualized, their bodies rendered sort of these objects of public interest and public critique. And coming towards the end of that decade, this movie is not interested in talking about any women's bodies, actually. I think the closest we get is that amazing scene where Bella arrives at prom and gestures to her friend that her tits look great in her dress. Right? She sort of like cups her breasts and is like, yeah. And her friend's like, yeah, I know, right? Like, insofar as we see any women's bodies being commented on, it's these teenage girls talking to each other about looking hot in a dress.
And positively, right?
And
not
positively,
like
exactly.
You're too fat for that. It's you look great in everything you've tried on.
I mean, everybody is thin.
Sure.
Like, we're not, we're not in some sort of radical post-fat phobic world.
No.
But we are not watching that kind of toxic behavior being circulated. And it does feel potentially like it is speaking back to a decade of the way that young women's sexuality has been treated by the media.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, there's a conservatism to that for sure. And also there is a rejection of like the deep misogyny of mainstream culture.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I love about the movie is how hot Kristen Stewart is in outfits that are really don't seem to be designed to objectify her. It's a lot of like Henleys and jeans and hoodies. And I'm like, God, you're hot. Yeah, we're not set up to think of her as a sexual object.
I would argue that she's pretty queer-coded in this movie.
I would argue that as well. I have argued that.
Can, will, have, will again.
What about you, Hannah? What is so 2008 about this movie?
I was really thinking about the turn towards established IP multi-movie series and how towards the end of the 2000s, that is becoming the dominant mode of movie making. And arguably the Harry Potter series is kind of what sets the ground for then series like The Hunger Games and Twilight to really take the box office by storm. But I think in this moment, we're seeing a pivot point towards where we are now, where basically almost everything is a reboot part of a series, or it's in some other way recycled or pre-established IP.
Yeah. 3 of the 5 movies that we're going to be doing for 2008 fall within this, right? We are doing Twilight. We're doing Sex and the City movie and Mamma Mia, which is based on like the blockbuster musical. And so there is definitely this turn happening in this moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And what is interesting about Twilight in the context of the rise of the multimedia franchise deal is that I can't think of another multi-installment love story.
I mean, I'm just trying to scan my mental Rolodex of movies. That feels true, what you're saying.
Yeah. It's interesting to see that it both anticipates a kind of move that we're going to see movie-making Hollywood take towards the small c conservative choice, right? So blockbuster culture is about these large studios wanting to make choices that secure their investment as much as possible. And so they want to make things that have already been made before. They want to make things that there's some evidence that there will be a pre-established audience for them, which is why there are fewer and fewer studios that are taking risks on original stories, new IP, things that sort of break the rules in some way. Like even Crazy Rich Asians, which was a pretty rule-changing romantic movie, was based on a really popular book first. So this move towards not making anything original is about sort of like an industry-level financial conservatism. And so it's interesting, like one of the things I find interesting about just 2008 is to be like, before that's fully taken hold as the model of how culture is made, what kinds of stories are being told? I think it's really cool that there is 5 movies?
Yeah.
Like a 5-movie romance series.
Oh, 50 Shades of Grey.
50 Shades of Grey. Good call.
Except that it's Twilight fanfic, but...
Yeah, it is just Twilight again.
It makes both of your points. It's a point and a counterpoint.
Ideal. The ideal response is something that both proves and disproves my argument. But romance has, for the most part, gone the way of TV. By which I mean romance media is on TV. Either it's TV series like Bridgerton or it's direct-to-streaming movies. And those all suggest that the people making romance assume that there is not a universal audience for it. And what is adequately universal is apparently superhero movies and nothing else.
Which is so funny. I hope that one of the lessons that we're learning from Bridgerton is the size of the audience for this, right?
Yeah.
If there's a piece of monolithic culture now, Bridgerton is in the top 10 pieces of that, which is the 2008 lesson to me, right?
Yeah.
And yet it is a lesson that Hollywood did not want to hold on to.
One of the best indicators that forms of bias like racism, like sexism, are not just about money is that big industries will throw away potential profit because they are so determined to continue to pretend that like women and people of color don't really exist.
Yeah. And fat people too, right? Like fashion companies that don't make size inclusive clothing. They're just leaving money on the floor because they don't want to imagine fat people in their clothes. And anybody who argues that economics has anything to do with rationality, it's like 2008 was a moment where it seemed as though maybe economics and rational choices were going to be one and the same. And yet, nope.
Haha, no. Okay, speaking of the economics of it all, I need to just really quickly hit the emergency stop button and talk about cultural appropriation.
In the Twilight series? No.
Who knew? Okay, so the Quileute people are an actual nation. They really exist. Twilight was filmed on their territory. It roughly appropriates some founding mythologies. So the creation myth of the Quileute people is that the creator turned some wolves into people, and that sort of is where Stephenie Meyer got the whole werewolf thing. And like, you know, the beach where we see them go La Push, where Jacob comes across Bella and is like, you're in my territory. That is Quileute territory.
Yeah.
The Quileute people received no money for any of this. And when we talk about cultural appropriation, I think it's one of those concepts that has circulated so widely and has fallen away so much from the actual original locus of critique. And a lot of what critiques of cultural appropriation are trying to get at is the way that historically, deliberately marginalized cultures then get plucked for content by the culture of the oppressor and used to make money. So like the tattoo that all of the members of the Quileute Nation have in the Twilight series was created by a non-Indigenous artist. Like it's just theft of ideas and art styles. And to this day, they have not been given money for any of this. And you can find there are lots of resources that people have built to actually provide the real background and the real information about the people. But it is such a textbook example of cultural appropriation that I particularly wanted to offer it to listeners as a next time somebody challenges you on the premise of what cultural appropriation is. Here's a perfect example because Stephenie Meyer got rich stealing ideas from this nation. These movies made a ton of money and they didn't see a penny of any of it.
I feel like this is the platonic ideal of cultural appropriation.
You just can't come up with a better example.
You can't. You could try, but you can't.
Yeah. And we don't get as much of the actual really messed up stuff that this series is going to do with its stories about Indigenous people, because that comes a lot more in the subsequent movies where we get the introduction of the werewolves and more focus on Jacob and his community. But that stuff's also really bad.
Yeah, right. There's also cultural misinformation spreading.
Wild cultural misinformation and the reinforcement of a lot of really sort of racist and anti-Indigenous stereotypes, suggesting, for example, that Indigenous men are more violent against Indigenous women, a sort of proximity between Indigenous people and animality, right? Like a lot of these sort of really dangerous tropes that have been historically used to justify the exploitation and impoverishment of Indigenous nations.
Yep. Hannah, you should watch this movie if
you enjoy being made dizzy by exciting camera angle choices. It's just the camera's just kind of coming from all over. Vanessa, you should watch this movie if...
I'm going to go sincere, and my you should watch this movie if comes with a little bit of a story. Friend of the podcast and just friend, Meredith Goldstein, who is the love letters columnist for the Boston Globe, the advice columnist. She watched Twilight on repeat and read it and reread it with her mother when her mother was dying of cancer. And she says that part of what was so beautiful about that was spending time in the imaginative space of immortality. And so I want to say that if you want to spend time in the imaginative space of immortality, engage with Twilight. It's really one of the lovely things about it. So.
Can't believe we didn't talk about the baseball scene. Before we go, can I give a shout out to CHMA, the student radio station, the campus radio station at Mount Allison University in Sackville, New Brunswick, which is where I'm currently recording.
Yes.
Shout out CHMA.
A big thank you to letting Hannah record there.
It was free.
Oh, Canada. Is that how you guys sing your national anthem? Oh, Canada.
I wouldn't know. I don't participate in the singing of the national anthem. You'll be shocked to hear. No, big on nationalism as a guy.
Blow me down.
I'm full of surprises.
Next week, everybody, we are going to be doing a close scene study of the final scene, which we didn't talk about this.
Prom.
But it's a prom.
Prom.
So Twilight was definitely a moment in terms of our romantic obsession with vampires, but it wasn't the first moment. Romantasy is obviously huge right now, but the literary fixation on vampires as romantic heroes has its own history that we think is important to understand in order to understand Twilight. And luckily, there is someone who knows all about this. Dr. Joseph Crawford, who is a scholar of Gothic and Romance fiction and is the author of The Twilight of the Gothic, Vampire Fiction, and the Rise of the Paranormal Romance from 1991 to 2012. He has taught a romance module at the University of Exeter since 2013, and we are going to now get him on the phone. Hi, Joseph. Thank you so much for getting on the phone with us today.
Hi, Vanessa. I'm very happy to talk to you today.
Okay, so you write about paranormal romance as the inheritor of Gothic fiction. Can you give us a brief overview of where you see Gothic tropes in vampire romances and just in the character of the vampire?
Yeah, so the vampire is one of the really central Gothic figures to come out of the 18th and 19th century Gothic tradition. And if you think about the original Gothic fiction, the kind of things that become popular in the late 18th century, they all revolve around these often highly emotionally fraught and often uncomfortably eroticized relationships of power and violence. And you think about the kind of original Gothic villains, these sort of crazy barons and inquisitors and monks and so on who chase the Gothic heroines around these crumbly old abbeys and castles in the sorts of novels that Jane Austen is making fun of in Northanger Abbey. And the vampire who emerges famously out of the ghost storytelling competition held at Lake Geneva, which is where we also get Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, is just this sort of literalized metaphor for that, right? For the way in which a relationship with somebody can start to feel like they are feeding off your life force, like they are drinking your blood. And I think that the vampire serves as this very, very flexible metaphor for all kinds of stories about imbalanced power relationships, about abuse, about exploitation, about obsession. And so you get vampire stories that run through the 18th and 19th century, well, very end of the 18th and then through the 19th centuries. But obviously the most famous of which is Dracula, which turns the vampire into this kind of international horror icon. But I think it's just this tremendously efficient symbol for all the kinds of concerns about sex and power and violence that have always been at the heart of Gothic fiction.
Yeah. You write that it seems that the most romantic heroes are those who, without being villains, nonetheless resemble villains as closely as possible. And I know you've started talking about this, but the eroticism of the person who's draining your life force, can you just tell us more about that?
So one thing that I talk about a lot when I teach romance fiction is the rise of the kind of Byronic hero, who we've come to absolutely take for granted in modern romance media, but who is not there from the beginning. when you first start to get people writing courtship narratives in the 18th century, what they mostly want to do is promote as their heroes nice guys, right? They want the hero to be the person who embodies what they see as sort of desirable, moral, religious, social qualities. But the trouble with the nice guy narrative is it doesn't actually leave the heroine with that much to do. And if you think about romance as a genre that has always been primarily written by, for, and about women, if your hero is this basically sane, solid, decent person who's always going to do the right thing, then that could actually be weirdly disempowering for the heroine. All she needs to, very frequently, those then are just stories about the heroine needing to sort herself out and recognize his worthiness and become worthy of him in turn. Whereas if your hero is a mess, if your hero is this dark, scary, violent, disturbed, traumatized, damaged individual, then the heroine has so much scope for activity, for agency, for reclaiming him, for fixing him, for healing him, for redeeming him, for reaching out through all those layers of encrusted emotional scar tissue. And so starting with novels like Jane Eyre, and then really taking off in the early 20th century, you get this real fascination in romance fiction with these heroes who are very, very nearly villains.
Yeah. So when do we transition to this sort of like paranormal romance that I would argue is actually like at its pinnacle now with romantasy? But yeah, when does that transition start?
Well, I think there's one really important turning point in the 1970s, which is when you start getting revisionist horror fiction like Interview with a Vampire and Salva Hagen's Dracula tape. And you start getting people depicting the vampire as a misunderstood character rather than just as a straightforwardly exploitative, abusive villain, which is what they tended to be before. And I think that's very much in line with the period's reassessment of the kind of people who vampires have traditionally been used as metaphors for. So just as this is the era that gives us crime fiction, like The Godfather, and the idea that you might be able to tell a story about the criminal rather than just about the detective, you see in the horror fiction of the period the idea that the monster might have his own story. And from his own perspective, the monster might be the hero of his own story. In particular, you see in the works of Anne Rice, a very powerful reassessment of the idea of the vampire as a queer metaphor. So, the vampire story basically grows out of two men with unreciprocated homoerotic crushes on their bosses, right? Which is John Polidori's obsession with Lord Byron and then Bram Stoker's obsession with Irving. So the vampire is always this very sort of homoerotically charged figure and has traditionally mostly been used for telling stories about how scary queer people are. But in more recent decades, as more and more sympathetic perspectives on sort of queer identities and queer sexualities have emerged, that's gone very much hand in hand with a sort of reassessment of the vampire figure and the idea that the vampire might be a sympathetic character with their own story to tell. And then those kind of early works in the 70s and 80s, they laid the groundwork for the takeoff of kind of paranormal romance proper in the 90s. And then I'd say Twilight as the first big takeoff point in 2005. And then A Court of Thorns and Roses and the subsequent romantasy boom in 2015 to 20.
Yeah. You write about paranormal romance as being a strikingly American genre. I'm wondering what you think about that.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a genre that has a funny relationship with pastness, I think, and with the past. Because very, very often, the paranormal romance hero is old. He's an old world hero. Edward is actually at the milder end of this in Twilight for being only a mere 104 years old at the beginning of the story. Very often, they also, like in the book version of the Vampire Diaries, Stefan Salvatore is like a 500-year-old Renaissance aristocrat. The Forever Knight TV series, Nick Knight is a 800-year-old French knight. And I think that what a lot of these stories enact is this kind of almost ritualized meeting of the past and present. And I mean, a lot of romance fiction does this, right? When you have, Regency romance, which has like a forward-thinking young governess paired with an old duke or something, right? She's standing for modernity and he's standing for the old world.
I've read that book.
I'm sure you've read that several times. This pairing is not unique to paranormal romance. Paranormal romance lets you take it to these sort of hyperbolic lengths, right? You have these characters who literally come to you out of the old world past, right? They literally are survivors of this pre-modern feudal order. And it lets you tell these stories about, trying to salvage the best bits of the past and the present, often with these sort of forward-looking, very young heroines. And I think that that's thrown into even sharper relief in an American context, where very often it's about the relationship with a kind of imagined old world heritage, right? Where these are characters who've come out of European history and European mythology and navigating their relationships with often young American or sort of American coded heroines who stand for a kind of new, more modern model of especially gender relations.
I'm also wondering if there's something about this, to some extent, you're already talking about the idea of the pioneer in the new world, but also a sort of individualism of who cares what the world thinks? We can be special, you and me, that seems uniquely American.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd call attention there to how frequently the heroine there is the one who comes into this very, very stratified, hierarchical paranormal world, right? Whether that's a world of vampire lineages or, werewolf packs with strict dominance hierarchies or fae aristocracies with all their different ranks and titles and so on. This world that runs according to very, very strict social rules. Yeah. And she will shatter it. By the end of book one, usually it's in ruins because things that have rules that have never broken for anyone else will break for her. So yes, I agree. It's very much a genre about individualism and about the triumph of the individual over sort of entrenched social expectation.
Yeah. Okay, so Twilight.
Yes.
So again, I'm going to read to you. So you write about Twilight that, quote, to put the matter crudely, one might just be able to sell 1 million books by being clever and lucky and original, but one can only sell 100 million books by being on some level in tune with the times. And so our series is about 2008 right now. We're really interested in this exact moment. So I'm interested in what you see as the cultural moment of Twilight. Why was she able to do 100 million copies at this moment?
So I guess one of the things that I find interesting about Twilight is that it was a work that was initially greeted with a lot of hostility and a lot of disappointment by a lot of people, especially kind of cultural commentators, journalists, critics, scholars, who were very upset that people, by which I overwhelmingly mean girls and women, were choosing to read and watch these things rather than what seemed to be more straightforwardly empowering stories. Yeah. But I think that in retrospect, so just as that kind of girl power boom of the 1990s, right, that results in characters like Hermione Granger and Buffy the Vampire Slayer as these kind of icons of female attainment, grow out of the boom economy of the 90s, right? Mm-hmm. When if you are a college-educated young white woman, you have a lot of opportunities available to you because the economy is growing very fast. So I think the popularity of paranormal romance, I think 2008 is a really important reflection point here, reflects the social realities of post-crash life. I mean, so obviously Twilight does slightly predate the Great Financial Crash, comes out in 2005, but it starts to get really popular in 2008, which is the exact moment when genres like chick lit, which had really prospered during the previous boom with their stories of affluent young women in living their best lives in urban centres, start to fall off a cliff because suddenly so few people are having that experience. And so I think it does tap into that sense of insecurity and those anxieties that maybe the world is not yours for the taking. Mm-hmm. And maybe you're not going to be the kind of ultra high achieving person who's going to get everything by your own merits because opportunities are closing down all around you. But maybe if you can find somebody who recognizes your own specialness, your own value, then they can kind of look after you. Again, if you compare Bella to those kind of the kind of heroines who were appearing in popular culture just a few years earlier than her, right? They're special because they can do amazing stuff, right? They are the cleverest, most magically talented, most powerful, strongest, most capable women in the world, right? But most people aren't that. By definition, only one woman a generation can be the most remarkable, most high-achieving woman of her generation. Paranormal romance heroines like Bella, they've much more often, they're just special for being themselves, right? Yeah. It's just, and that's enough. And so they find somebody who recognizes that is enough. And that becomes, I think, a increasingly appealing fantasy as the sort of economic situation changes and as the global situation darkens. Yeah, it's very much a post-crash genre. And I think that in particular, the recent resurgence of romantasy. Romantasy, I think, very specifically a post-pandemic genre. And they do speak to these sort of cravings for stability in a world that no longer seems like a very friendly place, perhaps especially for young women.
Oh my God, this really made me so sad. Okay, I have one more. I have a million more questions for you, but I have one more question for you. So you write that Twilight is the wish fulfillment fantasy to end all others. And you've started talking about this, but I'm wondering if you can get into more of the specifics. Obviously, I mean, the idea of never dying and eternally being with it, right? But if you can talk more about that.
Again, I think this is interesting, the disconnect between how Twilight was read by its fans and its critics, right? Because its critics read it as a story about disempowerment, right? That Bella is this 18-year-old girl who gives up on her whole future to just become a housewife and mother forever, right? She never goes to college, she never gets a job, everything is just foreclosed. But that's not at all how its fans read it, right? For them, this is a story about someone who gets everything. At every moment in the story where Bella and Edward clash seriously about what Bella is going to do with her life, Bella always wins. And at every moment where somebody in the story says to her, what you want is impossible, the world doesn't work like that, has never worked like that, it always does work like that for her. It just does. The world rearranges itself around her. And so by the end, she has this list of acquisitions that are not just excessive, they are impossible, of which my favourite one is that she is simultaneously an 18-year-old, newlywed bride and the mother of a 16-year-old daughter. Time itself rearranges around her, and she never has to raise that daughter. That daughter just grows up overnight, which I'm sure is Stephanie Meyer wrote the Twilight after having had 3 children in quick succession. I think that's very much the fantasy of an absolutely exhausted mother of 3. She gets all the money in the world and never has to work for it. She gets to be the most beautiful woman in the world. She gets to be super powerful, and her superpower lets her turn off everyone else's superpowers. So she gets complete control over everyone else. And one of my favourite bits of Twilight is the absolutely insane passage after Bella turns into a vampire, where she gets up, she puts on a designer dress, and she runs around in the woods eating mountain lions. And it's just
my favorite part of the movies.
It's this completely wild sort of fantasy of living this sort of unhinged existence of freedom and glamour. And it is a story about empowerment, not quite the sort of empowerment that people had perhaps been looking for. But Bella gets everything in the world, including things that should be mutually contradictory, including things that don't even quite make sense. And I think that its initial fans really did respond to that, and to the sense of this being a story that is, a wish fulfillment fantasy in which she gets every imaginable reward just for being her.
Oh my God. Okay, I could talk to you for the rest of the day, but I'll let you go back to your job. This was amazing. Thank you so, so much.
Okay, well, no problem. I hope you're able to get some useful material.
You've been listening to Hot and Bothered. Thank you to everyone who came out for our virtual live show on Sunday. It was so fun. That was one way to support the show, but another way you can support the show is by going to our Patreon at patreon.com/hotandbotheredrompod, where we will talk about a bonus scene of Twilight. You'll get a whole extra episode of Hannah and I gushing about Twilight. We are a Not Sorry production. I'm the executive producer, and we are edited and produced by Ariana Nettleman. We are distributed by Acast. Thanks, as always, to our soulmate level patrons, Molly Reilly, who we would chase through an airport to declare our love to, Elizabeth Schweinsberg, whose heart we would play a game of one-on-one basketball for, Lauren Byer O'Connell, who we would call up on stage to dance with us in front of the whole summer camp, Claudia Hammerman, who we would give the whole door to float on, even if there was room for both of us, Avi Lichtenstein, who we would make every person in the kingdom try on a shoe for, Kristen Hall, who we would travel through a time portal to spend the 19th century with, Shiri Yadlin, who we would write a sonnet about and read it in front of the whole class, Delia Rose, who we are majorly, totally, buck crazy in love with, and our brand new $50 a month patron, Leah Goldberg, who we would carry on our backs as we jumped from tree to tree like a little spider monkey. A big thanks this week to Joseph Crawford. We loved talking to you. And to our wonderful team, AJ Aramas, Courtney Brown, Anissa Ahmed, Danny Langley, Nikki Zoltan, Stephanie Pausell, and Julia Argy, my co-host on Twilight in Quarantine, if you want to go back and listen to us talk about Twilight for like 100 episodes.